morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes. Welcome to the last day of this conference, and it's really encouraging to see the presence of people, which I was a little apprehensive post-elections. We are stress-free. All of us know what the results are, and hopefully, what I gather, most of us are happy with the results and outcome. At the same time, we are really privileged to have amongst us Professor Kenneth Tobin, and most of us know him as Ken Tobin, and we call him Ken, but it's really a privilege and his greatness that he accepted my invitation to come here and share his experiences. Ken Tobin is a recently retired. He has accepted to retire, but was before that, maybe a few months back, presidential professor of urban education in the doctoral program at Carney Graduate Center in New York. Throughout his career, he has published over 400 books, book chapters, and journal articles on the topics of science education. That's nothing, it could be more than that. 400, he has been quite modest with what I get to read here. In the topics of science education, teacher education, emotions, wellness, and research methods. According to Google Scholar, this is what Wikipedia is telling me, but it could be much more. He has been cited 17,700 times, and I wouldn't be surprised if it surpasses 20,000, and Google might not have got all the citations. You can imagine the extent to which he is passionate about the work and how he is regarded in the science education community and beyond that. Today he is going to talk to us about the topic he has chosen is research on knowing oneself, an imperative of transforming STEM education. If we know ourselves, can we do it? Over to you, Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rika. Wow. I don't believe in those statistics, so take it with a grain of salt. But I can tell you for sure I have not written 400 books. So, is that what it says? Then it must be true. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Where is home? Home is now, right? So now I am at home, and it's a privilege to be here with you to share these moments. I started with the forest because these days my research focus is on what we call contemplative inquiry. And I think it's so important to find time in every day and perhaps in every moment to be in the forest. I think it's just so important to find some space to clear the mind, to unattach from the emotions that are going to drag you down. Whether you realize it or not is another matter, but you have emotions that are attached, and they will create disequilibration in your body that will lead to wellness projects. You can say that's not for you. You would wish it so, but I'm afraid you need to be proactive, you need to pay attention, and we need to develop new ways to know ourselves so that we can take proactive steps to, instead of deal with symptoms, as is often the Western approach to staying well, to get ahead of the game and to prepare ourselves for productive lives by changing our lifestyles. And our lifestyles need to be in harmony with the rest of the world, the rest of the universe. We are individuals while being collectives. We are separate while being connected. And these are principal tenets in the kind of research that I've been doing for some decades now. And It's not a question of turning on the switch and suddenly becoming one way rather than the other. It's kind of a journey. And the journey for me started in schools in Western Australia. I began my research projects in 1973 in some, what we might call middle schools in Western Australia. In those days, they were upper primary grades with children aged about 11 and 12. And the thing that I studied in those days was wait time. The amount of pausing that happens as people interact. It's not just the bursts of speech, brr, pause, and then brr, pause, brr. So what is the length of the pauses, and how do the length of the pauses change the quality of the interactions between those who are in the game? And that's never left me. We started that in 1973. Rika mentioned I retired 2 months ago to continue my research, of course, but I'm back at where I started. Once again, we are thinking on the importance of the pauses and what you should do in those pauses. We shouldn't just take them for granted. It's not just a question of extending for 3 seconds and hope for the best. There are some things that we might do, perhaps we should do, that will improve the quality of the interactions while at the same time sustain our well-being. And sustaining well-being is terribly, terribly important in schools. Schools are terribly stressful places. They are breeding grounds for teachers' coronary projects, for diabetes too, and for a host of wellness projects that we were starting to find. They are places where children not only get angry and sad, but they start to grow health projects that stay with them through their lives, which are cut short because of their experiences in schools. Schools should not threaten the health of teachers and learners, and yet as researchers, I think we've been a long time getting to the stage where it got onto the agenda and it could stay on the agenda. I'm looking at a school in Philadelphia. It is a long time ago now. It's 20 years ago since I took that photograph. And yet I put it there because Mirabelle, the young lady on the end, now a grandmother, is explaining some aspect of chemistry as she was learning a curriculum that would never connect with her life. She was essentially wasting her time, as was the teacher, as they went through the motions of learning a curriculum that had very little relevance to the quality of life for Mirabelle, the quality of life for the teacher, and others in the class. Many of those in the class there have spent time in prison. It is time for researchers not just to write the tales that earn promotion and earn fame, but to do something about it. You know, one might ask, Ken, what have you done to improve the quality of life for Mirabelle and others who are in the frame there? And that's kind of the project. That's why I brought that picture today, because we have changed our research approach to accept, embrace that responsibility for research to make a difference. I'll fast forward a little bit to my time in the Bronx. The classes look the same. We could be 10 years on looking at that. We could be there today. It would be very, very little different. But fast forward to the Bronx, and Ray Liena, an immigrant from the Philippines, is teaching in the Bronx. Ray is soon to have a heart attack. He is soon to have diabetes 2 that will threaten his nervous system, threaten amputation. As I speak, his life is in the balance. And yet, he's a teacher. He was a doctoral student as well, and he wrote a chapter in his dissertation that never was completed. Teaching makes me sick. And that was a label that just brings tears to my eyes right now. Teaching should not make anybody sick. And yet he had learned to look angry. And he would greet the students at the door and he would be angry. And I would say to Ray, don't be so angry. And he would say, Ken, I'm acting. And I would say, but Ray, does your body know the difference? If you're producing all that anger, what is happening to the blood chemistry? What are the cortisol levels? What's happening to your heart rate? What is happening to the blood oxygenation? Well, Ray did not know, but he went to hospital. He had to quit teaching or die. And still, he's facing these choices as he struggles with old age. He's a little over 50, and yet his end is rather near, I suspect. So these are the things that I think we need to think more about. And the heart of all of this, I think, is emotion. And so the question in our research came to be, what emotions are being expressed during teaching and learning? And how might we ameliorate the emotion if we want to do so? So I'm not arguing that every emotion needs to be extinguished. I'm not saying don't be angry, don't be sad, don't be afraid. There are very, very good reasons to be afraid sometime. If you're afraid, you better run. You better get out of Dodge. If you're angry, express the anger. Just don't let it stay around for a week or two. If you're driving a car, pull over and be angry. That's okay. But don't get in the car and drive off still angry. And so the question we had was, how can we ameliorate excess emotions when we want to? We wanted to bring that onto the curriculum front stage, not in the backstage. It seemed that this was very, very important. What does your voice sound like when you're angry? What's anger anyway? Is it a dichotomy? I'm happy. I'm angry. Probably not. What's that aggravation? God, I'm aggravated. I live my life aggravated. I'm a tormented soul. Oh, is your belt too tight? I was born in Perth, Australia. My dad told me, tighten your belt. Lift your shoulders up. You know, poke your chest out like that. Shoulders back. Good way to die young. Loosen your belt. Drop your shoulders and breathe. We were taught to be men, and men had square shoulders. They had narrow waists. Their pants you couldn't do that. You know. So there is some re-education necessary, just not of me, but of my parents and of my children. And it goes beyond learning chemistry and learning physics. It's learning how to live a good life and to continue to live a good life. So here are the things we've looked at. Some of these words you won't know about. Prosody. Prosody is the quality of the voice. Listen to my voice, isn't it beautiful? It's so nice to listen to. I'm already putting half the audience to sleep, so it must be very, very melodic, you know? But if my body changes its chemistry, and it'll do it just like that, it'll switch, and the cortisol will flood into my body, and the voice will change. It will reflect anger, it will reflect maybe fear, and it may reflect sadness. These things can happen as your body changes automatically and without awareness. Sometimes you'll be aware, usually you won't be aware, because that's how humans rock. We've developed systems, and they call it the autonomic nervous system. And that autonomic nervous system changes the possibilities for prosody. So you can say to a teacher, intonate your voice. But before you grade the teacher down because they don't, just check to see if the teacher is afraid. Because if the teacher is afraid, saying, come on, intonate your voice, it's impossible to do. Because that's not where the nerves are firing. You can no longer, the nerve that connects to the back of the tongue, that allows you to change the frequency and to change the sound and to change the energy distribution of the voice, it all switches down, because it's paramount that all of the energy helps you deal with your fear or deal with your anger. And so understanding a little about ourselves and others is important if we're going to give them advice. If a person cannot inflect their voice, advise them to breathe. Drop your shoulders, loosen your belt, relax, hug the trees, walk in the garden. You don't have a garden? Imagine the garden. Same for kids. If the kids are having a bad day, don't shout at them and make their day worse. Don't punish them and make them do this and do that. Let them go and breathe. Give them time out. Meditate, reflect, drop your shoulders. Don't hold your shoulders back like that and tense up and produce all that nonsense that we call blood chemistry. You've got to get into equilibrium and harmony. Prosody, facial expression of emotion. I love this picture here. This picture here. Oh, this picture here. Who's the guru?
Technology guru.
Oh, I hate to call the guru so early. Can we get the pretty smile? Oh, that's it. Thank you.
Happiness.
So happiness. We can reflect, we can see happiness in the face, in the eyes, in the muscles, in the mouth, in the teeth, and so on. And I think that's not a fake smile. That's somebody who's really happy. She's talking about her grandmother and the impact that her grandmother has had on her education. She's a scientist and she's about to become a teacher. I hope she is still smiling. Proxemics have to do with your movement around the room. As you move around the room, the way you move reflects your emotional state. Whether you can get down, how you perceive the sound. Because if you're angry and if you're sad, if you have an excess of emotion, you lose the capacity to discern the difference between a human voice and background noise. In order to hear the human voice as human voice, you actually need to be functioning in a social communication mode, which means the vagus nerve is functioning in one of the modes that support social communication. The vagus nerve comes out just here at the occipital, at the back of the skull, just there. And the one on the right supports social communication. If that shuts down and the left kicks in to prominence, we call that the reptilian mode. It's an earlier form of the vagus nerve, and it supports fight and flight. And the nerve that connects to the ear that allows you to make these fine distinctions no longer functions in that mode. Or it doesn't function in the same way, is probably a better way to say that. And so just be aware of that. Gestures, big gestures are going to represent oftentimes big emotions. If you're aware that you're using big gestures, just be aware. And you could ask yourself, is this where I want to be in my communication? What is the impact on the learner if I'm using big gestures as compared to just little gestures? Like there are big gestures and little gestures. And then the physiological, and the physiological was a breakthrough for us. I was aware that breathing was really important. If I was in martial arts and I needed to do something amazing, I had to breathe short, sharp breaths that were really up in the diaphragm. And before long, I would be so strong and I'd be so angry. And that's what you needed for martial arts. You needed to be ready to go, all your muscles ready to move. Not a good time to talk poetry. And so not a good time to hear a good story. You're ready to go. And I suspect footballers and tennis players and so on all need to get into fight-flight mode. This is where you take over and you take conscious control of your autonomic nervous system. We knew that. And so we want to ask the question, what is your pulse rate when you're just sitting there listening to me? Probably comatose, nearly half dead. But what is your pulse rate? Put your hand up. Who knows their pulse rate right now? What is it?
Right now, no.
48.
But I usually want it to
Well, think about it. What do you think it is?
around 70.
Around about 70. So you're in good shape. Any more 70s in the room? No? Okay. What about your blood oxygenation? Where are you with blood oxygenation? Anyone know? Anyone know what it should be? Okay, it ranges from 0 to 100%. Would you rather be 98 or 20? You'd rather be 98. That's good because that's about normal. So 98% is a good place to be. 100%, not a good place to be. Too much oxygen is not good for you. It's better than being 92. If you're at 92%, the oxygen masks come down in the plane. Okay, so what happens when you start to teach? Well, it depends who you are. Pulse rates can get up to 137. Oh, they can get up much higher than that. But in our research, typically, pulse rates will get up to 137. Not when you're teaching, before you're teaching. Just the mere thought of teaching, especially if you're a little bit out of field, it's terrifying. And so pulse rates can come up. So you may want to ameliorate that. But what happens to oxygen if the pulse rates come right up? Good question. We wanted to know that. Unfortunately, we had people teaching with blood oxygens in the 80%. Oh, yes, 80%. Oh, you feel a little bit lightheaded. Well, sit yourself down before you fall down, because you are about to fall down. And if you prop yourself up because you're an Australian male or an Australian female by pushing your chest out and holding your shoulders, it's going to happen. It may not happen today, but it will happen. You need to find a way to detach. But first, know yourself. Know what your blood oxygenation is when you're at rest and when you're busy, doing whatever you do in social life. And teaching is just one example. We've looked at that. Prosody, we use some high-tech, but it's free. It's an application called Praat, P-R-A-A-T, produced in the Netherlands. It's a beautiful thing. Anyone who does research on discourse analysis probably knows about Praat. It's not so easy to use, but a 5-year-old can learn it pretty quickly. What we're looking at there is an energy burst. You can see a couple of little syllables being uttered. And then there's a pause of about 0.3 of a second. And then there's some trailing off in the language. Underneath, you can see the energy distribution at a given point in time. This is why the voice sounds so beautiful sometimes. You see the harmonic, the first harmonic, for those of you that did physics. And then these are the overtones up here, the higher frequency stuff. Hard to produce. If you're going to do that, like I do, then you're going to be very tired at the end of the day if you talk a lot. Better to share the talk around, because talking in a way that engages others can be tiring. And so Praat can help us with these kinds of analyses. If I had been looking at blood oxygenation, I would probably say this is a sign of low oxygen. High oxygen, high energy. Trailing off, energy diminishing, getting toward the end of the sentence, watch out, you may get giddy. So that is what I would see there. Let's look at the next one. This is just another way to look at the harmonics. Instead of having the grey shaded area, you can see them more in energy bands, and you can see that they change and overlap and so on. This is just regular speech. This is just some teacher teaching. We have a look at a moment in time at their voice, and you can see what's going on energetically with the voice. This is the science of prosody. Trying to understand prosody. We could talk a lot about that, but let's not. And this is another example that you're seeing where we have loudness and frequency on the same scale down there. The green is loudness and the blue is frequency. And basically it's showing the frequency of that trace that you see up there and its loudness. And if you were doing wait time work, you can see that there was a pause there of about 0.25, a quarter of a second, okay? So that's prosody, just in case you want to go that way. It's quite easy to do. Finger pulse oximeters were used in our research. It goes on to the, it can go onto any finger, but typically you put it on the index finger and you have a wristwatch kind of thing, which is, you can look at it as you teach. So it's there, or you can project it onto the screen and you get a printout like that. And what that does, it allows you and others to monitor what's going on. So you can see the 97 there, that's the heart rate, that's the percent of oxygen. 57 would be the pulse rate, and the length of that vertical bar is a bit like blood pressure. It's not exactly blood pressure, but it's a good proxy for blood pressure. And so you can look at that, or others can look at it, and they can see what's going on. In one of our studies, we had people who would look and monitor the students and the teachers in a room and intervene with breathing meditation when and as necessary. We saw great variations that caused alarm. We had no idea what was happening, and we certainly didn't want to lose anybody because they were teaching or learning. And yet we saw dangerous signs as we looked at the oximeter. Nowadays, and I just downloaded this last night, there's an iPhone app that allows you to get all of that data. That cost me $4.99. Can I put in it for a receipt? Just joking. The other finger pulse oximeter was a Nonin, which is a high quality medical device. It cost us about $350. And it keeps a continuous 3 times per second record for as long as you care to keep it going, so that you can look at rather long periods of time and correlate them with video and other records that you have. And that's the kind of research that we do to make sense of all of this. Now, I said earlier that one of the things we wanted to do was not just to write papers and get famous. We wanted to make sure that what we learned benefited others. We call that authentic inquiry. We've been doing this for a lot of time now, so I have lots of papers about authentic inquiry. And if anybody would like to have any of those, just send me an email and say a few prayers, and probably it'll happen. I'll send you some stuff. I'd be happy to do it, as a matter of fact. So here's what I did in my own class. This is my doctoral level class. And we started every session with breathing meditation. And typically we would do breathing meditation for 5 minutes. Now the class was 2 hours. So to take 5 minutes was sometimes a bit difficult for me, but it was never difficult for the students. They came into New York City, they came through the transport system, they walked along 34th Street, they elbowed their way through the thousands of people, and then they came to class and they were messes. And what we needed to do right from the outset was to quiet them down, let them quiet their minds, get ready for learning. So that 5 minutes was like investing in their future. So that's our breathing meditation. We found that if you just did breathing meditation, people would finish and there would be an outburst like effervescence. They would all lose it again by being excessively happy. And we didn't want that. And so we followed up with freestyle writing. Many folks who've studied this now call it mindfully writing. That's Mauricio Pietrocola sitting there with his hand on his third eye, writing thoughtfully, I guess. For those of you that know Mauricio, he's a scholar from Brazil who was with us for a while. And the rest, me included, are just sitting there writing away. The incredible thing, doctoral students have writer's block. Sometimes they sit for days and they write 200 words. it was unusual for anyone in 10 minutes to write less than 500 words. And so it was a way to release whatever was preventing them from writing. Freestyle, and what that meant, that's why we picked it, was write on anything you want. And I'll read it if you wish, but no necessity. Just write what you want. If you want someone else to read it, give it to them. If you don't, that's your decision. And so this was something used to ameliorate excess emotions. That was our first kind of foray into this. This is what we call a heuristic. A heuristic is not a model. It's I call it a shapeshifter. So it's not like the learning environment questionnaires in a sense, but it looks like one. What we do, we put a Likert scale out there so that people will commit to a particular point. By the way, this is available if you want. You can download it from my website. Under recent, I put the PDF file for this set. I'll give you the address in a minute. So this is just an example. Mel Gajata, a former doctoral student of mine, wrote a few papers about this. And there are many versions of the mindfulness in education heuristic. And what you're seeing there are some sample characteristics, 2, 4, 6 of them. And that would be 6 of 30. You would never use all 30, although we did at some stages as we were figuring out how to make it work. What you do is you pick some that are salient to your particular class, and you want to make them aware of the unaware. The whole idea of the mindfulness heuristics, and we have many of them that I'll show you, is to heighten awareness and provide a catalyst for change. And so that's the whole purpose. If you're interested in any of these heuristics, let me know. We're writing a book that brings them all together right now, so it's convenient for me to ship them to you. For yesterday, I spoke to the Dean about co-teaching. We have a co-teaching heuristic. So people who are in teacher education programs, you can look at the co-teaching heuristic. It enables teachers and students to become aware of what should be happening during well, not should, could be happening in a co-teaching experience. Similarly, co-generative dialogue. We have a heuristic. This was something we took seriously for 10 years. So we had a lot of information. Here's mindfully speaking. Oh my goodness. Do you know someone who should read this? I do. People think I'm a garbage container. They talk and 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 talk. And I start to talk and they talk over me. And then finally, when I get a chance to talk, nobody's listening. And so, do you ever get that feeling, or is it just me? I need a hug. I think this is, something that I take very, very seriously. I think there's a lot of people who need to read this. They need to take it to heart, and they need to change. Not anyone in particular. No one here, of course. We're all great. And if they don't do that, then maybe they would become mindful listeners. So we have a heuristic for mindful listening as well, so that you know that you do monitor people's facial expression of emotion. If you're talking and you look and the face has gone blank, you might as well stop. It's too late. They've switched into the fight, flight, or even worse, freeze. They're probably about ready to drop. So be aware, and if you need to change, unattach and change. This is the idea of the heuristic. If the heuristic doesn't fit your context, change it. It's a shapeshifter. The characteristics should be adapted for the context. It's to be used by intelligent folks. Now, something right off the wall. You ready? Okay. We couldn't make things work very well within the Western tradition. And so I went to Singapore. Anyone here got an interest in Singapore? I know who's got an interest in Singapore. So I went to Singapore, and because they are well known for reflexology. And I wanted to find out about how reflexologists removed excess emotions when they were there. The only trouble with reflexology is it hurts. So it's like you're paying your penance or something like that. it's painful. People scream when they start to do working on your toes. And so Po Yang Tan, who I was telling you about yesterday, she was driving me around in her Mercedes. How do doctoral students drive Mercedes in Singapore? Anyway, she was driving me around in Mercedes, and she said, Ken, I think you would be better with Jiu-Jitsu. First of all, people keep their clothes on, and secondly, it doesn't hurt. It's soft touch therapy. And so one of the first things you learn in Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm now a certified practitioner, and I've been doing this for 10 years, right? But the 5 fingers are like gateways into our emotion. And so the thumb, which connects into the stomach flow and the spleen flow, so these are very, very important, is also attached to worry. And so that's the emotion of worry. And so if you're very worried about something, you can hold your thumb. And if that doesn't work, hold your other thumb. And thank you for the sign. Look at this, he's sucking his thumb. That's what the kids do, the babies do. And why do they do it? They're worried. They want mommy. You know, they want food or something. They want warmth, hugs, that kind of thing. And we stop them. Don't suck your thumb. You know, you'll get buck teeth or something like that. No, they won't. They will lose their worry. They'll be able to grow their organs associated with the stomach development and so on. This is for fear. This one here. This is for anger. Right? So this is for anger. It's also for the liver flow. Hold it every day for 5 minutes, and then hold this one for 5 minutes, because it will break down your propensity to get liver disease, including diabetes and other terrible things. And so it's just a good way of being proactive in regard to your life. This one here is for sadness, right? And so sadness is obviously important. It's also associated with the large intestine and the lung. So people that are coughing a lot and so on, they want to hold this finger and the liver. If you're coughing a lot, it's because your liver is malfunctioning. If you've got a little vertical line here, look in the mirror. If it's there, hold your middle finger. And if you don't, it could get worse. That's the liver flow. This is an indication that you could have liver flow problems in your future, and you probably have had in your past. And this one here, the little one, is only for your heart. Pretty darn important. If a person's having a heart attack, you can hold the little finger and help them to protect the organ during the heart attack. It also ties into the small intestine, so it's associated with a lot of big label diseases that you would like to ameliorate if you could, like Crohn's disease, for example. The emotion is pretense. People who are always wanting to be something else. If you are a wannabe, if you want to be a professor and you're an associate professor, if you want to be a dean and you're just a full professor, if you're a dean and you want to be a provost, just forget about that nonsense and hold your little finger. Both sides, 5 minutes a day, and if you can find a forest, go to the forest. Okay, we don't have time to do this today because I've been prattling on a little bit. This is an example of a meditation that we did early on based on that. And it has to do just with breathing while holding each of the fingers in turn. And as I said, you can download this. This one here, people have been intrigued with the chakras. I can't say anything to embarrass Rachel because she's not here. But if she watches the videotape, do I have a chakra? She says to me, do you have a chakra? It doesn't matter whether we say yes or no to that. She does. She has 7 of them or more. And they are just places where energy can come in and go out. And if you don't believe in them, that's okay. You still have chakras. And we can use this knowledge to improve the quality of life. There's a little meditation that we do in Jinshinjutsu. It starts with putting your hand on the crown chakra. You can just do it. Put your hand on the right It's where you're starting to go bald. Just put your hand there. Hopefully it's not too sunburnt from not wearing a hat. Then your second hand would go on the third eye, just here. And then you would hold until you feel the pulses in both. When it comes into harmony, it might take a minute or two, then you would move to the next point. In this case, we go from there to the throat chakra. Keep the hand on the ground, don't go moving that. And then the left hand comes to the throat, then to the heart, then to the sternum, then to the belly button, and then down to the pubes. Don't do that on the bus, that will rest. And then finally, the right hand comes onto the back to the coccyx. Coccyx is very, very important in Eastern medicine. Listen, these are very, very good things to do while you're commuting, as long as you're not driving. Of course, I can do it when I'm driving because I have a Tesla and it does auto navigation. So that's a little private joke to me. This is our research that we did on all of this stuff. This involves event-oriented meditation, event-oriented inquiry is what I meant to say. And this is published, and you could look at it. Donna King was the teacher. Many of you would know Donna. And she was teaching a science teacher education class. And basically we went through, we found events associated with high pulse rate before she was teaching. That was a surprise to us, that she was so nervous that her pulse rate, which is around about 60 to 69 while resting, was 138, I think. Let me see, pre-teaching, 118. So it got very, very high for Donna. And so that surprised us. And so we taught her to do breathing meditation to bring it down. Then during the teaching itself, we had high pulse rate, low pulse rate, high oxygen, low oxygen, and we went in to see what was happening in those cases. That enabled us to develop a new theoretical framework that involved the autonomic nervous system. Stephen Porges is a social neuroscientist, or really a cognitive neuroscientist, and he has a theory called the polyvagal theory. And I've been talking about it today. It involves the vagus nerve and the ways that the vagus nerve controls the way our body operates and the potentialities of the body. This enabled us to see differently the data that we had and to create implications that would otherwise not be there. And so that's important. We don't have time to go through it, but I've actually mentioned quite a lot about it. And in the paper we trace the trajectory from Darwin through to Porges, and Porges has a lot of YouTube videos that you can watch, and I think you'll find it really interesting because he relates the polyvagal theory to sudden infant death syndrome, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and a lot of things like that. But he doesn't relate it to anything that goes on with teachers and learners, which is what we've been doing. I think it's got a lot of potential, not necessarily a truth, it's a theory, but it surely is an interesting theory. And so we've learned a lot. We followed up with event-oriented inquiry, and we were especially interested in the low oxygenation scenario. I was scared about that, to be truthful. As a teacher educator for all these years, we'd never paid attention to the blood oxygenation. We didn't have the wherewithal to know anything about it, but now we have the tools. What were we going to do about it? That roll up our sleeves and get into it is what we had to do. And I was probing deeper. And what we found when we really looked at the low oxygen scenario was that her voice started to change. As she went into low oxygen, the vowels suddenly started to be aggravating. Loud, and they'd lost their prosody. It was as if she was angry. She wasn't angry, but it was as if she was angry. And of course, we knew the research on the fact that if you have an angry person in the room, watch out, because in a moment, everybody will be angry. And so it was like an osmosis that was occurring. And so we wanted to learn more about that. And so I just remember saying to Steve Ritchie one day, "Hey Steve, look at this. She's breathing